my intervention today is, can anticipation be made in a democracy? So it's not the classic subject in foresight, but I think it's quite important. As an introduction, I'd like to challenge what Matthew Sweeney said yesterday. I don't think that the current pandemic is a black swan. There were historic precedents. The impact and likelihood of a pandemic had been analyzed, and not just among experts. There were authoritative, widely shared foresight reports that had already drawn attention to that risk 1 or 2 decades ago. Yet we were completely unprepared. And to explain that, in our global yet very small community of foresight practitioners, we like to complain about the lack of foresight literacy among policymakers. And we discuss how to include policymakers in foresight, how to make the outcome more accessible to them. But isn't that a wrong approach? My point today is that we should rather improve the understanding among foresight practitioners of what policymaking is. Because we tend to forget that policymaking is a democratic process, or at least that it, for most of us, that it should be. I mean, democracy remains widely supported across the world. But A, lack of preparedness weakens democracy. And B, perhaps, and this is what I want to discuss, democracy makes preparedness impossible. At least that's the question. Lack of preparedness weakens democracy. What do you see with that, the current crisis? Inequality, fears about global warming, aging, urbanization, frustration about delivery of public services can lead to social unrest. And here we have a worrying indication. Young people are quite prone to consider that other political systems might be just as good as the democratic system. They are more prone to consider that it is a good idea to have a government controlled by a strong man. The old idea that authoritarian regimes are better able to set long-term goals, to steadily implement a strategy, seems to be returning. Authoritarian regimes, however, have their own weaknesses. An elite that can be isolated, short-sighted, corrupt, and over-dependence on one strong man, or indeed a woman. But history shows us that they tend to think more often and more abruptly than democracies. I'm here speaking about the political system, but actually that often translates into the emphasis put on strong leadership. For those who are asking, because I could see a question coming, there are no slides. Because yesterday I had enormous difficulties to see the slides of the panelists. So I decided against slides. So don't look for slides. Please try to listen and prepare your questions. So my first point is lack of preparedness weakens democracy, especially among young people. And that might be because of this idea that democracy would make preparedness just impossible. Because democracies would be essentially short-termist, focused on the electoral calendar, and very vulnerable to emotions, populism, calling for immediate response from the policymakers. But that has to be challenged. There should be no better place than democratic institutions and process to harness collective intelligence, to give a sounding board to dissenting voices and new ideas, and also to find sustainable compromises, including between generations, but more generally between contradictory interests. This is exactly what foresight is about. Don't tell me that it is just a too idealistic or optimistic view. I mean, just to take one example, highly democratic Norway, and when I say democratic, both in political and economic terms, managed to make the decision to put aside oil surplus revenue to provide for the welfare of the future generations. But, and this is my second part, after having said that the lack of preparedness weakens democracy and that democracy could be the better place for foresight, I come to my second set of ideas. First thing is that we have to change foresight. And the second thing is that we have to change democracy. We have to change foresight. Here I will refer to what many of us frequently say, and especially, for instance, my dear colleague Ricardo yesterday. Yes, we have to be more inclusive. But question is to include whom? We should try to include the layman in this conversation, in this foresight conversation, but not just the layman. We have to go beyond high tech. We have to include human sciences experts, lawyers, because democracy means rule of law. And perhaps we have to go beyond imagination. Foresight practitioners like imagination because they like to consider alternative futures. All good. But to make these alternative futures possible, we also have to think, or at least to make possible, planning. We have to harness foresight in planning, in funding. And yes, we have to be humble. In some cases, foresight can be no more than a training tool inside given organizations. And my last point about changing foresight is we have to develop our foresight tool, work more on backcasting, on stress testing, etc. So we have to change foresight. But we also have to change democracy. As far as the political decision-making is concerned, we should not let anticipatory governance be the privilege of the executive branch. Democracy, so far, is representative democracy. We have parliaments that exercise scrutiny. They have the last say. They have the last say. If my team would like to avoid disturbing me with WhatsApp messages that appear on the screen, that would help. They know what I think in general. So, political decision-making. Don't let anticipatory governance be the privilege of the executive branch. Parliaments in democracies exercise scrutiny. They have the last say about the rules that are going to govern the society. But we also have to change democracy and think in terms of delivery of public services. Political decisions have to be prepared, impact assessed, options clarified, and this is where they need to be inspired by foresight. Yes, we need administrations serving democracy with integrity, but not submitted to democratic hazards. In a world where bureaucracy is an insult, we should think about this. I wish, in the case of the coronavirus crisis, that our public services would have been inspired by foresight to do some planning, to prepare for what could come. The bureaucracy provides an element of continuity, which is needed for a structured approach of the future. But above all, we need public debate. That young people who increasingly consider that a strongman regime would better prepare us for the future, at the same time, they want to participate more than their elders in the decision-making process. So how would we do that? There are more and more at local level experiments in deliberative democracy, where expertise is put together with political debate with citizens, and which then the outcome can be taken into account by the institutions. So perhaps we should think about encouraging this. There should be no-go zone in our reflections on the future of democracy. We might have to constitutionalize long-term goals, such as fighting against global warming. We might have to desacralize our constitutions. So mimicking what Tancredi says in this masterpiece that in that movie, Leopard by Visconti, democracy needs to change so democracy can stay the same. As a conclusion, provisory conclusion, because I will be delighted to look at your questions. I would like to quote our ESPAS report. ESPAS is the foresight network of the European institutions. We produced a report in 2019, which is our starting point for a conversation, not just at European level, but also at national level or at global level. I hope you will all join in this conversation. So the quote is, "The future is not just an idea of an upcoming state of the world. It always includes a method through which the idea can come about." Foresight is to the future what memory is to the past, an organizing yet selective principle creating order in complexity. Just as memories, the future is therefore a discussion space where meaning is created, not a more or less an unpredictable or predictable set of events. Foresight is never about one future, but about different possible futures. So to reflect on how democracies address the challenges of the future, we need to reflect on the democracy of the future. So I will finish here my intervention. But before looking at the questions, I'd like to thank my colleagues, Ricardo especially from the ESPAS network, Miguel and Fran, whom I really admire, even to the extent that I might be a bit jealous for the work they have done to put together that summit. And all others, my team of course, including Emma who spoke yesterday, but also all others who help us to mainstream foresight in the work of political institutions. I stop here and I look at the questions. Freya, I think that we should fit in. The question is, what do you think of the Future of Europe conference and the Futures Literacy Centers? I don't want to comment here on other initiatives, but in general, I think that we should engage. Other questions? Spectateur anonyme. Wow, it's coming all of a sudden very quickly. Isn't democracy infiltrated by lobbying? Well, it depends what lobbying is. Here, I mean, the question is about integrity of the public services, and at European level, there is an enormous amount of effort invested in transparency, which nothing is perfect. But here I want to say something positive about lobbying. We cannot reproach to institutions to be too far away from the private sector concerns or the citizen concerns if we do not listen to lobbies too. Not all lobbies are just vested interests. Some of them are, but Amnesty International is a lobby, for instance. Médecins Sans Frontières is also a lobby. Greenpeace is a lobby. Shouldn't we listen to them? We have to listen to them and with integrity to find a balance with other interests. Big companies have a say too. They have a point. We just have to ensure that those who haven't got a lot of money can also be listened to, workers, NGOs. So I hope I answered to that question, but I'm very happy to continue the discussion separately. What are the challenges in mainstreaming foresight to policy making? This is the point. I mean, democracy is seen as short-termist by essence. And this is something which I challenge in my intervention. Yes, Lever, I think that young people can be more involved in foresight. And I hope I made clearly the point that deliberative democracy, provided it is supported by a real political support, I think that's possible. If you see what happened in Ireland, for instance, with the citizens in the Citizens' Assembly, yes, foresight can be part of the political debate and include young people. How can designers help government constitutional long-term issues within countries? Well, I think here we need the lobbies. Today, designers are working more and more in policy making. This is good. And here, referring again to what Ricardo and others said, going visual, avoid getting into a conversation rather than pouring written work on the citizens. That's certainly what's the most important. Along my career, I have been struck by the fact that the public sector is always talking about engaging in public-private partnership. But at the same time, I participated to foresight summits with a lot of foresight practitioners coming from the private sector or working in the private sector. And I was absolutely struck by the fact that they did not factor in the public policies. How foresight could be more available or known by policymakers. You can invite them, but when you understand that what political decision is, the compromise that are made, the life of an average policymaker, elected representative, there is very little chance that you can include him in a foresight exercise. So you have to be extremely careful about the time they have. And this is why I think that deliberative democracy among citizens, because I mean, political representatives, they are responsive to public opinion, and this is what they should be. So I would hope that the foresight work includes, as far as possible, the lay citizen. How do I think we should include more women and young people in decision-making process? As I said, deliberative democracy, Citizens' Assembly, where you put together experts, foresight practitioners, and the citizens, even if it is at small scale, it's a learning process about what policy making is for the citizens. And it's also a sounding board for emotions and expectations among the public. It's also a sounding board about opinions, thoughts, and emotions from the public, and this is what policymakers listen to. So, Sam Hamilton. Yes, it is very siloed. The experience we have, I mean, we've already started with the ESPAS network, at least a big conversation between institutions, and that was already something. There are very few parliaments that include foresight work. And when they do, it's not so much on global trends, but rather trying to understand, and this is the work that my colleague Lieve van Woensel wonderfully does. They tend to concentrate on high tech, and yes, it is very siloed. Again, I mean, it might be a poor answer. I hope it's not. Engaging with citizens at local level, because I mean, even global trends concerns the lay citizen. If you speak about aging, if you speak about urbanization, if you speak about pandemics, I mean, that concerns the very concrete daily expectations of the lay citizen. This is how I think we should include them. The experience I have is that it's very hard for us, just because we're too small, to go towards the public, but at least all the work we do is available to the public. Trust in democratic institutions likely to be strengthened or weakened by the pandemic crisis. I don't know. What is quite sure is that the expectations will be strengthened. Everybody all of a sudden discovered that the health system is key. It might well be because of the safety net that Europe will recover faster of the current crisis than, for instance, the United States or countries which have less of such a safety net. Trust in general, I'm not sure. I hope there will be more support, and if there is more support to public intervention by the public, then democratic institutions can be strengthened. Instead of seeing democracy as a single thing, should we discuss what democracy should mean concretely in different situations or different levels? Yes, this is why, I mean, perhaps I wanted to be very open to the questions, and perhaps my intervention was not clear enough. But this is why I put emphasis on deliberative democracy. So, Hanno, how our foresight efforts relate to the European Commission's renewed activities? This is really the branding of the ESPAS network. It is an interinstitutional network where we parliamentary research service worked hand in hand with the European Commission, the European External Action Service, and the Council of the European Union representing the member states. So I think it's unique. There are some parliaments who invest in foresight, but then do not do it together with the executive institutions. So this is how we have done it so far. Now we have a new commission, and it's not very clear. There is now a commissioner for foresight, Mr. Šefčovič, and we very much hope that he will also support the ESPAS network, but this has to be seen. On the other hand, many member states are now rediscovering foresight, and I think that there will be altogether within the European Union more support to foresight. What are the consequences of not establishing this trust? It just weakens democracy. Lack of preparedness weakens democracy. Leah, this is, you're a politician. First of all, I very much admire you because it's a very difficult life to interact with the public all the time. And how can we involve people better in planning for the future? In planning, I'm not sure, because planning is the subject of experts, in discussions on funding. But so it's not so much about planning. I think that the real thing is creating the conversations with citizens via deliberative democracy. And here there might be a fear from representatives that this is going to be a competition against us. But actually it's not the case. There are many examples where actually this participatory democracy helped the representatives. So do we think that war against COVID should inoculate Orwellian tools to democracies such as drone to watch public space, geo-tracking, general blood testing, sanitary certificates, and so on? Again, that depends on how widely among the public values are shared. So what are our values? I mean, we in the European Union are very proud of our data protection rules. That's a first step. It relates also to the trust in the institutions. But yes, there will be more and more, and this is what is worrying with this growing support for authoritarian regimes, is that actually if the public starts to believe that they will be better protected by strongman regimes, then all these tools are going to be used, as you see in countries which I'm not going to mention directly. I mean, massive surveillance, geo-tracking, but geo-tracking for the spread of the pandemics can be very useful. The thing is, it has to be anonymous. And that's for the policymakers with the support of the public on the basis of their values they have to set the rules. How do you stay objective to advise politics with trends and change that might be opposite to their ideas? I mean, that brings us to that would be a very long conversation, but altogether I think that we could, so when I said that there should be no-go zone about our thinking in democracy, I think that nothing is sacred. We could change things in our institutions to make them more agile. If all interested are put together and enter into a conversation, then the advice to policymakers will be by itself objective. Maximo, foresight helps educated groups to avoid temptation of short-term compromise with corrupted groups. I could not agree more. I would just add, helps educated groups. Who are the educated groups? Everybody can be educated. And in deliberative democracy, unlike, you know, fantasies about direct democracy, too simplistic direct democracy, there is a huge effort of bringing expertise and information to the public so that they are also educated actively, and they actively engage to I don't like the word education, they actively engage on the basis of facts, figures, information, intelligence. So yes, this is how foresight can help. So Sana, I'm going out of your 3 questions. I'm going to take what are the most crucial things for foresight practitioners to get involved to. I think they should insist on long-term trends. Mega trends are quite well known, and they're not going to change from one day to another. And how they can, this is when I said we have to change foresight, how foresight practitioners can get involved too. I think they have to bring something. For the time being, I'm getting very interested in modeling because it brings a lot about, it allows us to go visual. Look at, for instance, how important it is in the case of the pandemics that these graphs about flattening the curve could be at the importance that these graphs about flattening the curve took. I think that that's one thing. Modeling and finding a very easy expression, a visual expression of this modeling can be very useful if practitioners and foresight practitioners invest in that. But we also have to think in terms of backcasting and include experts, especially public funding experts. So I think foresight practitioners should invest more in planning too. Modeling, going visual, planning. Steph, what do I think of the efforts to teach policymakers in foresight to become futures literate? I think nothing. I think that's an overall discussion expressing the frustration of foresight practitioners. I rather think that we should increase the we should increase the literacy of foresight practitioners about what the policy making is and how it works. Which countries experiment with deliberative democracy? Here I can refer to a small paper which I wrote in one of our publications, the Global Trendometer. There is a whole list. I mean, Ireland made a huge effort which led to concrete results because the policymakers showed a lot of good faith in taking on board what had been expressed in these citizens' assemblies. Not just Oregon and German-speaking Belgium. There are many examples, and there are many different possibilities to organize this. So I just encourage you to refer to that paper, which I think has been circulated as a support to this session. How does the European Parliament try and think to involve cities and city networks more? We have at European level the Committee of the Regions, where the Parliament is in constant dialogue with the Committee of the Regions and also with the Economic and Social Committee. Martin, yes, I do think that governments, but not just governments, parliaments have to work in a more networking fashion, Well, spectator anonyme. What do we do to be listened? We speak to members of parliament. We get support from our authorities, and we invest a lot in the Espace network and in the global conversation. This is how you have two people from our team who were intervening during that summit, even though it's a non-working day for us. Natalia. Again, we should work about deliberative democracy. What about younger European democratic countries which still struggle with their conservative past? Organize citizen assemblies. If you cannot organize them at, I mean, can build upon the experience with which Miguel and Francisco made with this global summit. I mean, young people are good at using social networks and high-tech platforms. So I think it's a cheap way to get them engaged, but of course you must be very dedicated to create that platform and to encourage them to engage. And if you have a wide enough support, then it will influence the politicians. Even in China, you can see that, yes, it is absolutely forbidden to criticize the Communist Party, but there is a very active civil society that is actively fighting against corruption and pollution. So just count on these young people about their digital skills. When you talk about planning, what does that on the policy level refer to? Oh, there are a lot of experiments. In fact, I was a bit I'm always a bit worried that there is such a concern about foresight practitioners to unlock imagination that we tend to forget that afterwards there is a decision to be made, that there is funding to be made. So I think, I mean, in the past, I mean, before planning became an insult, planning and bureaucracy became an insult. There were efforts to plan the development of public policies, defining indicators to assess impact, and whenever a preferable future is identified through foresight, backcasting should be developed. I mean, if you want, say, if you insist on education policy, for example, this has to be planned because it is costly for the public spending, and it won't bring results before at least 10 or 15 years if you start with you start with children. So there should be not just a foresight exercise about which skills should be made available in 15 years. There should be a backcasting exercise about what can be done, what has to be done today, and with which funding to get there in 15 years. This is what I mean, but by planning. And there, again, you have to put together collective intelligence, and you need public services, neutral services that can bring an element of continuity.